Before we start this video, a large thank you to Marco, Lucas, Kenneth, Igor, ProShadow, Anson, Unity, Chi, Jack, Isoro, and Nard for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. And a massive thank you to Halo Burner for their continued support of the channel this month on Patreon. It is greatly appreciated, my friend, and I hope you enjoy the video. Hello guys, and for everyone wondering why this is not a continuation of blocking, it is. We just kind of need to do something first before we set up our blocking animations and how they're controlled. So, what is an Animator Overrider controller? Basically, this takes a regular Animator controller and you can replace specific animations with it. So, the example I'm going to use here, which is what we're going to use it for, is let's say you are using a straight sword. Well, you want to keep all your normal animations, like maybe your roll and your jump and all your actions like pulling a lever and opening a door, but you need to have straight sword specific attacks. Well, we can use this Animation Overrider controller here to replace the light attacks on the previous controller with the straight sword's light attacks. And then let's say you switch to a spear. All the animations stay the same except for the ones you replace. So you'd replace the straight sword attacks with spear attacks, the straight sword locomotion with spear locomotion, etc., etc. So basically we can use these to change specific animations when changing our weapons, which makes it so we don't have to use completely different controllers, and we can just basically override the animations we want to change. So this is very, very useful. Again, using an example here, if you have a great sword, you're going to use a great sword idle, so your Animator Overrider controller would override your default idle with the great sword idle, and if you switch to a straight sword, it would go back to using the straight sword idle. So, how will this work with blocking? We always use the animator of the weapon we're currently using in an action. So that's how we're going to set it up. So if you're attacking, your attacking weapon's animator takes over. So for blocking with our offhand weapon, we use its animator to gain access to its blocking animations. So if you're holding a shield in your offhand, you start blocking, you're now going to use that weapon's animator. But there could be a problem here. The question is, won't this look strange if we're holding a greatsword in our main hand, and then suddenly the locomotion switches to the shield in our offhand, causing the greatsword to cease resting on our shoulder? Because remember, if we go to the shield's animation set, then the shield idle is going to look a lot different than the greatsword idle. And now the greatsword, which is in your main hand, is going to take the shield's idle. So yes, this will be a problem, but we're going to remedy this with masks. So basically, when we block, we're going to change the main hand weapon, or the weapon that's not blocking, to use the idle animation of its original weapon set, and just use a mask for that. So you'll still use the controller of the shield when you're using the shield, but the weapon that you're holding in your other hand will use the idle animation from its animator controller. We're just going to set that up, like I said, using a mask. So if you don't know how that works, don't worry. I'm going to explain it. It's not very confusing at all, especially once you see how it's done. It's very straightforward. If you feel like you're able to go and do this yourself, now that you have the game plan of this video, I encourage you to pause the video and go do that right now. Give it a shot. Worst case scenario, you mess it up, that's okay. Come back to this, we got a video, we'll do it together. Okay, so once again, I do strongly encourage you to give this a shot if you think you know what's up. I'm sure you can figure it out even if you don't. Don't be afraid to look at some documentation, Google some stuff, and I'm going to jump in right now, so if you are ready to get started, let's go. Okay guys, first thing I'm going to do is go to your weapon item script and open that up, and if we do that, you're going to see I have a comment here from ages ago. It says, Animator Controller Override, change attack animations based on the weapon you're currently using. So I'm going to go ahead and make a header here, and I'm just going to say Animator or Animations or whatever you want to say here. Say that as long as it's clear that this is where the controller is housed for overriding your animations. So the variable type we want to use here is a public Animator Overrider controller variable, and I'm going to call that Weapon Animator. So now we have to go to a few places. First on the Character Animator Manager, where we have Play, Target, Attack, Action Animation. We want to always change our controller here. So let's make a function for Update Animator Controller and call that here. So this is specifically Play, Target, Attack, Action Animation. Not play regular action animation, because this insinuates that you always are using a weapon to do this. So we're actually going to make this require a weapon to do this as well now. So this doesn't exist yet, but let's make it. It's going to be a public void, not private, sorry. Update animator controller, public because we're going to call this from a few other places as well. And all we're going to do, you can make it require a weapon if you'd like, or you can make it require just the animator controller, whatever you want. But we're going to use the animator controller from the weapon anyway, so either will do. And all you do is say character.animator.runtimeAnimatorController is equal to, and then you would put in this animator controller specifically. So I'm just going to make it require an actual animator overrider controller variable, and I can just get that from the weapon when we are calling that on the play target attack action animation function. So weapon controller. Now, we've already got this mostly set up, and I'll show you what I mean by mostly. I'm just going to pass weapon controller. It doesn't exist yet. So if I go to where we're actually calling this function, let's just make it require a weapon item first, and that's going to give us some errors. That's okay. So I'm going to call it weapon. And I'm going to say weapon.weapon animator, not controller. Whoops. But yeah, just make this require a weapon, and it's going to give us probably 7 or 8 errors, but watch, this will be very, very easy to fix because we've already set it up to support this basically in the past. So I am going to save this now, and let's see where the console directs us to go first. I think it's probably going to make us go to an AI action first. Yeah, so now if you're using your AI to act like a player, if you've done that yourself, like they use equipment and weapons, they can change their weapons in two-handed, then you want to use this. But if not, if it's just an undead like mine, you only want to use play target action animation because this is just a simple animation and all of the logic is controlled with animation events. If you have something more complex, use this function, but we'll get back to that in the future. Just for now, use play target action animation if you're just using a simple AI like me. Now, where it is, you can see here on attempt to perform action on weapon item action, you see how it passes a weapon performing action, but we kind of never use it. Well, we're going to use that right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to pass the weapon performing the action in each of these weapon actions. So under perform light attack, just pass this weapon every time you see an error. And I think we have another one on perform heavy attack, another few functions rather, we need to pass this. So once you do that, that's it. There's no more errors anymore. Like I said, this was designed originally to support this. We just didn't add it in first because I didn't want to overwhelm everybody with the amount of information. But now we're ready to move on to this next step. It's best to get the basics down first and slowly add on to it. It's just, I find it's easier to understand for sure. So what are we doing here now? Well, this is every attack action, and all we're doing is passing just another piece of data where now we're just passing the weapon that we're using when we're doing this attack. And now from there, it's going to go to the animator and it's going to auto switch that controller for us. So that means the proper attack animation we played depending on your weapon. Next, go to load write weapon. This is on the player equipment manager. And anywhere inside here, you want to make sure you're also setting the controller. So whenever you equip a weapon or change a weapon, it auto-loads the new controller. It's always the right weapon because you're always going to take the animator controller of your main hand weapon. So we're going to say player.player animator manager dot update animator controller, and we're going to pass the current right hand weapon dot weapon animator. Okay, it looks good. Let's save that. We got a couple more places to go. So next we're going to go to the player network manager, and on current weapon being used, changed. This is especially important if you're a client. So I'll show you what I mean. Right here, on current weapon ID being used, changed. So whenever we change the weapon we're using, like I said, we want to update our controller. Now this is already being done locally, so we don't need to run this locally. You can if you want, but I'm just going to say if we're not the owner, return, because as you just saw, whenever we actually play an action, we're automatically assigning the weapon animator anyway. We just did that just now under light attack and heavy attack actions. Again, you don't have to check for the owner. If you want to run it twice, that's okay, just to be safe, or just because you'd rather run it here instead of over there. It's all the same, but I'm only going to run it if we're not the owner. So I'm going to say if player dot current weapon being used is not equal null, then we're going to set the current weapon animator to that current weapon's weapon animator, and that's it. So basically, if I attack on my end, my current weapon being used updates, and on your end, my character gets his current weapon being used changed, whatever I've updated it to. And then it runs this function, and then it updates the animator on your end for my character as well. And that's the idea. We're going to test this too, just to make sure it is all working as intended. All right, so that is the last place I believe that it needs to be inputted into. So let's go ahead now and make the actual overrider controllers. I'm going to go to my animations folder, and I'm going to make another folder in here. I'm going to underscore it so it goes to the top. I'm just going to call it controllers. And here is where I'm going to place all of my weapon controllers in the future. So let's create one for the straight sword, and defaultly we're already using the animations for the straight sword, but in the future we'll probably use some unarmed animations, but for now we'll just keep them as is. So you don't need to change anything in the straight sword, but drag in the humanoid animator because that's what we're overriding. You can see here you get all these animations, and whatever you drag into these fields, it will override the animation that it's listed as. So I'm going to duplicate this now, and I'm going to call this one spear, and I have the spear animation set in this project, and I have a spear weapon, so I'm just going to use this just as an example to show you. So you can see here we have light attack 1 and 2. I'm just going to do these two real quick to show you that this works and to make sure it works. I'm going to place in my spear light attack 1 and spear light attack 2, and I'm going to go ahead and set up the animation events on these off video because you guys know how to do that. I don't need to waste your time with that right now. So I'll quickly just go and copy some from my sword and then paste them onto the spear and make sure it works. We also need to go to our weapons and make sure you make another weapon if you don't have one. So I have the straight sword here, and I'm going to drag in the straight sword weapon animator. I have the spear. I'm going to drag in the spear weapon animator, and I should do one for unarmed as well. And the broadsword can use the straight sword animator because it's the same weapon type. So like all spears would use the spear overrider, for example, unless you want to give it different movesets. That's entirely up to you. So I'm going to make one for unarmed too and make sure I drag that in there so I don't load in with an empty animator. That's very important. Okay, that looks good. I am going to save this now, and if I go into the game here now, you can see I'm holding the straight sword. I switch to the spear. You can see my animator switches to the spear. Back to the straight sword. Now it's that straight sword again. I perform a light attack with the straight sword. Straight sword light attacks. I perform a light attack with the spear, and there's the spear attacks. So, cool, working as intended. Now, I'm just going to make sure that the animation is moving correctly. Stab this guy, and yes, it is working. Cool. I'm here on the client. I'm watching the host. As you can see, when the host switches weapons, his animations do switch. The spear's pivot is a bit off, so I got to tweak that. It's a bit too high. But before I do that too, I am going to show you how to set up a controller fully, just in case someone wanted to see. And also, if for some reason you can't actually sign in or connect to your host, just try recloning the project. That happens to me sometimes too, I find. Just delete it and reclone it, and the issue should go away. So what do you want to drag in here? Well, every single locomotion animation. In this specific instance, it's not really that necessary because the spear and the straight sword have basically the same locomotion. But I'm going to do it anyway just to show you what I would do with any other weapon. You want to do your jumps too if you're using animations that do have different jumps. The spear and the straight sword have the same one-handed jump, but different two-handed jumps. So I won't bother to put those in, but you should put them in if your weapon does have a different jump. You can honestly use the same jump for all weapons. I do that in Nephilim most of the time. It doesn't really bother me as much. I might change it for the two-handed one sometimes, that's it. I am going to do the walking and running. Again, the spear and the straight sword do share these, but I'll just do them just for the sake of doing them. You definitely want to do the attacks. Those are obviously the most important. I keep my rolls generally the same. And if you find an animation like this that you have a really confusing name to, make sure you change it so you know what you're changing. So go to the FBX file, and right here it's just Mixmo. I'm going to change it to reaching out and hit enter. And then I'm going to click off the FBX, and you can save that. And now if I go back to the controller, the animation will have that name instead of just having the name Mixmo. So you can see there, very easy to see what you're changing. So yeah, again, just the rest of the attacks, do these real fast. The charge attacks and then the running attack. Light attacks are already done, and then you're basically good to go. If you are using any of our animation sets, it's pretty important that you get the weapon pivot right, or else the animations can kind of look weird. So you can see here, I have the position X, Y, Z, and the rotation all set up a certain way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just basically copy these and go back to my main project. And I'm going to go to the weapon pivot here. I'm going to put in all these values. You can see that I just made a guess with this. I basically copied the straight sword, so it was looking a bit different. Now if I put in these values, you're going to see it's going to change, honestly, quite dramatically. And it'll go from really pointing upward during the attacks to being more center focused. And if you prefer a different way with any of these weapons, you can definitely change the rotation and position yourself. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely weekend. When we get back next week, we're going to finish our blocking system. So we'll set it up so we can actually have some blocking animations. And we'll make the controller switch to the shield or the offhand weapon or whatever you're blocking with when we're blocking. And then go back to the main weapon when the blocking is done. As always, a special thank you to my patrons. This is because of each and every one of you. I get to keep doing this, and I love doing this. So thank you very much, guys. I will see you all next week.